Thanks for tuning into another episode of Grace on the Go. I'm Pastor Douglas. Today I want to focus in and talk to primarily our male youth, our kids in junior high, high school, and even our young adults who are still single. And really this information still applies to those who are still married or in a committed marriage relationship, but specifically this is something I feel is more helpful for those who are young and single. And today I want to talk about sexual immorality and sexual impurity. And I want to go to 1 Thessalonians 4. Here we see the Apostle Paul, he says, "For this is the will of God." So stopping right there, this is the will of God. So I know this is important. This is what God desires for our lives. This is the will of God, your sanctification, that you abstain from sexual immorality, that each one of you knows how to control his own body in holiness and honor, not in the passionate lusts of like the Gentiles who do not know God. And so I want to focus on this because I think that sexual immorality is the single issue that is killing us in the world of Christian men. It is our greatest stronghold that Satan has against us. And it's probably the greatest hindrance of the non-intellectual hindrances that men who don't believe, who aren't believers, have when considering Christianity. And so I want to talk about this issue here because we, as men, are just captive to the sin of lust, to the sin of sexual immorality, and we don't have to be because we've been freed from this through Christ. Galatians 5:1, "For freedom Christ has set you free." This stronghold that this has against us doesn't have to have a hold of us. And we can see from this that we can learn how to control our own bodies. Ultimately, though, this is through the Spirit. This is through being in the Word. Psalm 19, 9 and 10, "How can a young man keep his way pure? By living according to your word." So being in the Word, being enriched in the Spirit of being connected with God is ultimately what will keep us from sexual immorality, keep us from these things. But I want to focus on a few things, specifically some practical advice for our young men, for our young single guys in dating relationships or not, to keep them from these things, keep them from premarital sex, keep them from pornography, keep them from lusting after women. And so a few thoughts on dating as it relates to sexual purity. First one is to men only date Christian women. And why do I say this? Because our convictions will go out the window if someone has less conviction than us. If we are faced with someone, if we're in a dating relationship and they are wanting to move farther than what we're wanting to do, oftentimes we will gravitate towards the lowest common denominator. And so we need to protect ourselves from these things. We want to be with someone who is equally yoked in us, who is going after the same things as us. Often I've heard this term, flirt to convert. That, if I date a non-Christian, then they'll be converted and come to Christianity and be saved, then it's okay. Well, this is a hard situation because we don't want to pair ourselves with someone that is not equally going after the same things as us. And even if we have that goal of getting them there, we have no guarantee of that happening. And so we want to be with people who have the same convictions of us, who have the same beliefs of us, who are going after the same things, of going after God together with us. Second thing I want to say is while you're in a dating relationship, if you have a date with a girl, set up your boundaries, set up your convictions before you start the dating relationship, before you go on that date. Say, hey, this is the line that I am not going to cross. Have that firm in your mind. If you try and get into a situation and make up the boundaries on the fly, you're not going to be in the right mind to make those decisions. Sit down before it all happens, before you're with that person, and say, I am not going beyond this line. Then tell that person, this is the line that we are not going to cross. And be very clear before you get into situations. The second one, along with that, plan out your date. If you're going on a date with a girl, make sure you know what it is. Hey, I'm going to pick you up at 6. We are going to go to this restaurant. we are gonna then go to this 7:30 movie, and I will drop you off by 10 o'clock. Date's done and over with. Don't leave these big gaps of what are we gonna do? Oh, we're just gonna go downstairs into the basement and hang out and have nothing planned. That is a recipe for disaster. And one that we see told to us in Proverbs 6, it talks about, can a man scoop fire into his lap without his clothes being burned? Can a man walk on hot coals without his feet being scorched? How can we put ourselves in these situations? We have nothing to do, we're alone in a dark basement, just watching TV or listening to music, whatever it is. How can you be in that situation and keep yourself from doing something? It's a hard situation. I don't trust myself in that situation. You shouldn't trust yourself in that situation. Don't put yourselves in situations where you know is not going to lead to good things. And we know what those situations are. Men, we don't have to pretend to be dumb in this situation of, I didn't know that something was going to happen while we were in my car alone at midnight, who knows where. You know your own self. You know the desires of your heart. Set up these boundaries, like I said. Have a plan. Have accountability. And that's the next one is make sure that someone knows what you're doing, when you're doing it, and will afterwards have the strength and the courage to look at you and say, what did you do? Did you stick behind that line? Did you go according to the plan you set out? Or did you go beyond that and do something? Have that friend who loves you and cares about you enough that he's also looking out for your sexual purity as much as you are. But the only way that works is if you have the courage to confess sin to him. If you just lie to him and say, nothing happened, and you just keep lying and lying, nothing's happening, is not going to stop itself. Have the own conviction in your heart to look at your friend and say, you know what? I did this. I messed up. I need help. And be willing to be open and vulnerable to that person. And this ultimately, the example we see in 2 Timothy 2, there's a lot too. 2 Timothy 2:2, we see it in the example of Joseph. If you are in a situation, say that you had a plan and you had a conviction and yet you find yourself, it is never too late to say, you know what? Nope. I'm going to flee from the situation. That doesn't mean, hey, we just, sit on opposite sides of the couch. You're going to gravitate towards each other. Flee sexual immorality. Get out of there. Say, you know what? Date's over. I need to go home. You need to go home. We need to separate. I need to go talk to someone, a pastor, a friend, your parents. Get out of that situation. Don't toy with it. Don't think, I messed up, we'll stop. Just get out of there. Flee sexual immorality. And I think what happens though when we are in these situations of immorality is because ultimately we're not trusting God that He has His greater good for us. We're saying if I wait for God's timetable of waiting till marriage, then it's not going to come soon enough. I'm not going to get what I want, and we're going to feel that we've been wronged. But ultimately, this is not true. Our greatest satisfaction will always come from being in God's love and in God's will. And God's will for us is clearly to flee sexual immorality, to seek holiness, to seek our sanctification. And so that message is mainly for the men. Women, I think this applies to you as well. And I want to propose this question to you. If you're in a relationship with a guy who is continuously moving you towards things that you're uncomfortable with, pushing you towards crossing those lines of sexual immorality, do you want to, one day, if you marry him, submit to a man who is unwilling to submit to God? Are you willing to submit to him when he's unwilling to submit to God? By going forward and doing these things, he is going against God's will, he is going against God's word, so he's not submitting to God in his own life. Why are you willing to submit to him? And so I would say get out of that relationship, break away from it, allow him to figure that out. I'm not saying cut him off completely, but maybe you have to. What I am saying though is women, be with a man who is so in love with Jesus that he treats you like you should be treated. Don't settle for anything less than what God has designed for you.